Hey, so I want to talk about a very taboo subject, arguably one of the most taboo possible, which is child abuse and paedophiles and everything around that. This is from, I thought this would be an interesting topic to cover because it came up on a debate forum about this phenomenon of so-called paedophile hunters, whether or not that's a good thing, i.e., vigilantism of that sort. Let me just be very clear so no one's left in any doubt. I think predatory abuse of children is absolutely disgusting. I think it's evil. Um, and I do think it should result in severe sentences. Um, I mean, what it does to a young person throughout their life and the anxiety it puts their parents through, all sorts of things. It doesn't, you don't need to be a criminologist to see why it's damaging. So I think it's a evil, destructive crime when you get that level of predatory behavior. Um, and that, yeah, that goes without saying. But by the same token, I've always been wary of vigilantism. We had two cases in this country which attracted particular public animosity. One was in the year 2000. A young girl by the name of Sarah Payne was murdered in the south of England. I believe it was Plymouth or somewhere in the southwest, can't remember exactly. And the other case was 2 years later, 2002, two young schoolgirls who were murdered in the Cambridgeshire town of Soham. Now, both cases attracted a lot of public interest, and both cases resulted in, I have to say, fueled by the tabloids, kind of public hysteria whereby suspected paedophiles were targeted. And the unfortunate thing about that is a lot of innocent men and women were caught up in that. So, for example, in the Soane case, you had women I heard about who happened to look like Maxine Carr, which was who was one of the killers involved, who happened to look like her. I should say, technically, she conspired with her boyfriend, although she was seen as the more evil of the two in some ways because she lured the children. Um, anyway, there were cases of women who just had a physical resemblance to Maxine Carr were violently attacked. There have been cases where pediatricians had their offices attacked. I believe it was South Wales because some idiot thought that a paedophile would actually advertise themselves. Um, and I think because we've had high profile cases in this country, there is a little bit of some degree of paranoia in the UK about this. Now, by paranoia, I don't mean that it isn't a problem. It definitely is a problem. We've seen high profile cases like Jimmy Savile and all the grooming gangs, predominantly by Pakistani men. But also, this is something, of course, there's white pedophiles as well. I get that. But what I want to focus on is how we respond as a society because I think because most level headed people are disgusted by it, then it's tempting to say, yeah, this sort of vigilantism is fine, or they're doing a public service. But there is a problem here, namely that they are targeting suspects. Now, I don't watch these shows, but from what I gather, it is a little bit different from those earlier cases I mentioned insofar as they're quite meticulous. They're quite, I don't know if professional is the right word, but they don't just randomly attack anyone. They do get their evidence, and they do target people where there is strong indication that is a paedophile, not just like mob rule. Nevertheless, vigilantism is vigilantism. I would say this. I think sometimes people are pushed into this when they feel there's been a lack of justice. When the public get fed up of seeing people getting off the hook, but because the nature of paedophilia, and technically when we're talking about young teenagers, it's a phebophilia to be absolutely technical about it. But when we talk about that sort of predatory behavior, there's few crimes that make people so angry and so sensitive as that. And that's understandable because it is one of the most evil crimes to target, to destroy the life of a child. That you would be hard pushed to find many crimes worse than that. I think arson, raping a woman, and knife point, they're all pretty evil crimes as well. But anyway, how does society respond to this? A friend of mine posted a report in which five paedophile hunters were arrested for detaining suspects, just detaining suspects. I haven't read the report, but were they detaining them and waiting for police to arrive, or were they detaining them and planning to like torture them or something? If it's the latter, then no matter how we feel about paedophiles, even if they are guilty, then I would agree with having those people being arrested because if you allow a situation where people are exacting violence on suspects, then ultimately we allow for anarchy. Now, I think it's totally different if you, for example, if there's a parent and they catch a predator with their child and they beat the living daylights out of them. I think most people would say that's absolutely understandable, as would I. I would do the same thing. I'm not a father, but if I were, I would want their blood. It's a totally natural response. Um, but the thing about justice is there's emotions and there's also emotions is only part of it. I don't think we can ignore them, but you can't determine justice solely on emotions. Now, when it comes to crime, I am very conservative. I mean, I've said this before, socially conservative. I feel very strongly about soft sentencing. I made that video a while back. I stand by every word of that. It makes my blood boil when you have destructive crimes resulting in a tap on the wrist. Um, I think there's a very big problem in this country with judges who are out of touch with the real world. And I think there needs to be more peaceful pressure put on judges to be more accountable. I think the public need to be far more empowered in this regard. I think that's something that needs to drastically change. And so far, I haven't seen a recent Justice Secretary or Home Secretary willing to do that in any sort of profound way. David Gauck, in my opinion, is a sloppy excuse me, Justice Secretary. Um, the sort of statements that he has made I am really not happy with. He's very much in the liberal wing of things, and I have a big problem with that. I think criminals who, terrorize the public need to face justice. But anyway, that's getting into generic territory. Regarding specifically predators, I think certainly sentencing needs to be very tough. But I don't think we should necessarily encourage vigilantism because even if they're meticulous, there's a reasonable chance they can make mistakes. And I could think of few things worse for an individual to go through than to be falsely accused of being a paedophile. I mean, that'd be horrendous. Because then, if you're sentenced and you're put into jail, then you get vigilantism from other inmates, and they don't mess around. Um, which brings me to that point. A lot of people have this idea that oh, we'll let the other inmates deal with them. Oh, they need to watch out when they're on the inside, and they think that's something to celebrate. Whilst I am very conservative on crime, I actually don't support this, and this is why. If you think, for example, it's okay for an armed robber to beat the hell out of a convicted paedophile, well, not many people are going to shed a tear for the paedophile, right? Myself included, because what they do is evil. It's evil. But that isn't making the armed robber reform, allowing him to be violent towards another inmate. So I don't think that should be encouraged because then you have a situation where inmates are taking over the prison system and inmates are policing it. Some people will say, oh, it's inevitable, but that doesn't mean it should be encouraged. And for me, this is yet another reason to build more prisons. I would be okay with having a prison specifically for child sex offenders remote from society so that society could be protected from these people. I mean, I was disgusted by a case in Australia a few years ago. It got a lot of prominence because of an interview that was done on the street. Um, this guy by the name of Leonard, someone, I forget his full name, but he was a prominent Australian paedophile. He showed no remorse. He had books published in the Victoria State Library. I mean, that's sickening. That is absolutely sickening. And that's the sort of thing that would absolutely understandably enrage the public when you get convicted paedophiles and they're actually proud of it. I think they're the minority. I think most paedophiles are disgusted by themselves. But the likes of him, I mean, that's stomach churning. And then living in, even if he had served a long prison sentence, clearly he shows no remorse. Um, so I think there is a real cause for sending them to an isolated location, forcing them to go on through some sort of hormone treatment to reduce their sex drive. But that shouldn't be seen as a cure. I mean, the way I see it is if someone knows that they have a problem, i.e., they're attracted to minors, they know this is a criminal offence. It's their responsibility to seek help for it. They can't just plead, oh, I'm a sick person, because that kind of detaches ownership of it. Okay, if you know you have urges, then you need to get help. And I do think help should be available at that primary stage before they've actually taken action on it. Help should be available, but and if I suppose you can make an argument they're not going to come forward because they'll fear arrest. Well, I would make the point if they haven't acted on it and they have actively sought help very early on when they know they have a problem, I'd be more sympathetic to that sort of person because they're taking ownership of it. But if someone knows that they're a predator and they do nothing to try and rein in on that, then they're entirely responsible. I don't think they could just plead, oh, I'm a sick person. If they know that they have a problem and they haven't acted on it, that should be the litmus test. Now, that brings me to another question. Someone looking at child porn, is that in the same category as someone who's actively abusing a child? Well, it's a complex question. On one hand, clearly it isn't. On the other hand, by looking at child porn, they're fueling a filthy industry which is using real children and real abuse. I mean, it's like snuff films. So this isn't harmless images they're looking at. This is actual children being abused. So from that point of view, it's, very often they will say, oh, I was just looking or I was doing research. But there is an argument, and I think it's a strong argument, that they're looking at child porn one day, they're going to graduate the next day to actually actively grooming children. So there is a strong argument to be made that they should be severely punished at that stage to prevent them graduating later on. But I think there's a lot of ways to look at this. And I don't like the idea of vigilantism because I think innocent people can be targeted. And ultimately, it's basically saying that we accept anarchy. I do think that judges need to be more accountable. I mean, what we saw from the abuse cases in the north of England, Telford, Rotherham, and so on, was that the authorities, now there was a specific issue in that, which was the racial dynamic. Authorities didn't want to act because they didn't want to be seen as racist. And even today, the regressive left refused to acknowledge that there was a specific problem in Pakistani British communities. There was. That's just a fact. Just as it was a fact that powerful white paedophiles were effectively covered up by the BBC. But where there are specific problems, I'm a strong believer in specific action. Of course, it's no good saying there should be generic response when there is a specific problem. I mean, you're not going to, the police in a place where there's been a specific problem with Asian grooming gangs it's kind of silly saying, oh, well, paedophilia is a problem, predatory behavior is a problem, we're just going to generally target predators. That means they're not on the lookout for the people they know to be causing the problem. And the regressive left are more interested in virtue signaling, really, than taking action. I mean, the point about that is nobody is saying it's all Pakistani British men. But there needs to be an acknowledgement of a specific problem, just like in traveling communities where there's been a number of high profile cases of basically human slavery in the UK in the 21st century, which is sickening. So I am a strong believer that where there's a specific problem, it needs to be specifically addressed. London, there is a specific problem with young black men and knife crime. These are not generalizations, they are verifiable facts. That's not to demonize all young black men, it's not to demonize all travelers, and it's not to demonize all British Pakistanis. It's just saying that there is information that is available that indicates there is something going on here, that there is a specific trend that needs to be specifically dealt with. Um, I mean, you can argue in housing estates in the northeast of England, there is a specific problem with young white men engaging in loutish behaviour. This is something that could be looked at in many ways. Anyway, I'm going to round this up. I think child abuse is disgusting, and it lasts for a lifetime. I do think there should be severe consequences. I think there should be very tough sentences. But I don't. I'm not sure about this sort of vigilantism. I appreciate that they would argue, oh, we're not being reckless. We're getting the right information. And I think maybe that they could also be said that they're frustrated with police inactivity, which I think is a legitimate complaint. On the other hand, innocent people can be targeted, and it does basically send out the message that anarchy is okay. Um, I think where people are literally protecting themselves or protecting their children, that's a different matter. But when you have people going out detaining alleged paedophiles, if they're getting the police, that's different. But if they're just detaining them and they're going to rough them up or something, you have to take the emotions away from it and look at it from a cold perspective of, well, is this justice or is it just vigilantism? Is it just revenge? Um, like I say, socially, I'm very conservative on crime. I have a big problem with liberals who argue about, we lock up too many people. I disagree with that. I think 99% of the people in jail should be in jail. I would argue more people should be in jail. There's too many serious offences that result in a tap on the wrist. So the result of overcrowding, build more prisons. Yes, it would be expensive, but I think when you weigh up the costs in the long run of reoffending, when we're looking at prison reform, then one of the issues has to be in easing the pressure on both inmates and staff alike. But anyway, that's getting into a wider realm. Specifically on the issue of child abuse, paedophiles, I'm not convinced about vigilantism, but I do think that there should be more assertiveness from the authorities. I would be in favour of, like I said, building specific prisons away from society, away from children, where these people would be forced to undergo some sort of hormone treatment on the grounds that they haven't acted to get help. And at the early stage, that help should be available. Whether it be psychiatry, whether it be, I don't know, but if they know that they are, attracted to minors, then they need to act on it. They need to get help. And if they don't do that, then they're criminally responsible for their behavior. Leave it there. Let me know your thoughts.